Hi. This is my first ever cold opening, guys. I've never done this. Where's the music? I know you're asking, but it'll be here in a minute. I just want to say thank you for everyone who came back for season 3, and welcome to anyone who's brand new here. For season 3, I've decided to cover the royal family of France, and the natural starting place in my brain was Eleanor of Aquitaine. However, I've already done an episode on Eleanor of Aquitaine because she was also a Queen of England, but I did that for Patreon. So, for anyone who's been on Patreon, this week is going to be Eleanor of Aquitaine from before. Anyone who's not, you should join us. We've been having tons of fun, and this just seemed like the perfect place to start the French royal family. So, I hope you enjoy Eleanor of Aquitaine, featuring my friend Cristel. Hi, and welcome to Long Live the Queen, where we talk about the women who made history. And by we, I mean the royal we, because it's just me. Today, we're going to talk about Eleanor of Aquitaine.
One day we will be remembered.
Hey guys, normally it's the royal week because it's just me, but not this week. This week I have my friend Cristel joining me.
Thank you for having me, Christina.
This is going to be so fun. I'm excited to have someone else to talk about Eleanor of Aquitaine with. She was kind of a badass. I mean, for her time, she was like a bit much.
Right?
She wasn't seen as perfect for her time at all.
No, she was scandalous.
Very. But for our time, I think she kind of killed it.
Yeah.
So Eleanor of Aquitaine was born in the year of our Lord, 1124. Probably, because we don't actually know, as is, normal for back then. She was a girl. Who writes that down? She was the daughter of William X, Duke of Aquitaine, and his wife, Duchess Eleanor, which is relevant, her mother's name. Her father's Duchy of Aquitaine was, at the time, huge. It was
like a fourth of medieval France.
Yes. It was the main, they were head bitches in charge for sure. But the borders were fuzzy because they didn't have GPS, so, just like, I don't know if you watched the new Game of Thrones, but there at one point
I haven't yet.
They have an argument about borders, and they're like, you moved that rock, or that pile of rocks. Like, that pile of rocks marks the border, and you moved it. And they're like, we didn't move the pile of rocks. I feel like that's the vibe I'm getting from Aquitaine. Like, we go to that pile of rocks to that pile of rocks.
A lot of the counts and dukes, and not dukes, but the counts and whoever were kind of unruly.
Yeah.
Aquitaine.
Well, and France isn't like France is now. The King of France wasn't really in charge. The King of France was only in charge because all the vassal lords under him would be on his side. But the King of France didn't really have any power. So it was kind of just like Duke versus Duke versus Duke, whose army is bigger. So Eleanor was the oldest of 3 children. And origin story time. Her maternal grandmother was the mistress of her paternal grandfather.
Oh.
Yeah. So her parents weren't related, but basically the Duke was having an affair with his mistress. And then the Duke was like, hey, so we can't get together because I am already married, but I have a kid and you have a kid. What if I marry my son to your daughter? And his mistress was like, yeah, let's do it. And those are Eleanor's parents.
So the book I was reading was The Plantagenets by Dan Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And I got out of that William IX, her grandfather, was considered the troubadour duke.
Yes.
And started the whole courtly love.
Yeah, he was very like, I'll sing you a song and be romantic. And her grandmother was like, ooh, I like that. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I get why her grandmother was into it. It sounds romantic. But also, how awkward is it if you find out, like, for her parents, for example, your mother and your husband's father had an affair, and that's how you guys got together.
That's so creepy.
So creepy. So creepy. So that is kind of the origin story of their family. So they're not related because, totally different families. But it's a little weird when your parent sleeps with one of your in-laws, I feel like. Especially if that happened first.
Very awkward.
So Eleanor was named after her mother, Anor, because Elia in Latin means another. So her name was basically just another Anor,
Okay.
which I feel like is kind of lame. But that she might be like the first Eleanor ever,
Okay.
because she was just another Anor. And some people are attributed to having the name Eleanor before her, but all the sources we have for Eleanor's came after her. So it might be like later in life they went by Eleanor.
Okay.
So then when it was written about when they were younger, that was written Eleanor, but she might be the first Eleanor ever because her name is really just another Anor.
Which is interesting because she had a daughter named Eleanor. She
Yeah.
could have been Ella Eleanor.
Yeah, she could have been Elia Eleanor. Yeah, no, she dug her name. I mean, she must have, right? To be like, yeah, this is a rad name. I'm going to keep it. So when Eleanor was about 6 years old, her mother died. Her mother had been out hunting with her husband, the Duke, and apparently developed a fever while out hunting and died.
Wow.
Yeah, just like some people suspect it might have been poison. I mean, they don't really know no one really seemed to want to poison her.
It's not like they had forensic science back then.
Right. She got a fever and she died. I mean, it could have been anything. Bad water, bad food, who knows? And we don't know much about Eleanor's childhood. But we do know she could read poetry in her native language, a southern dialect of French. I heard that if we wrote down everything we knew about Eleanor, everything, just like someone sat down and wrote like everything without conjecture, just like this is what we know for sure.
The facts.
Yes. It would only be about 100 pages.
Oh, wow.
Which is crazy. It's a lot for someone that long ago. We know way more about her than most of her contemporaries that were female.
Well, she was a force.
Yeah. She
It makes sense that.
She was all the gossip for the whole time.
Yes.
So when her mother died, her brother also died that same year, her only brother, when he was about 4 years old. So that's not good, you gotta have boys.
Yes.
But this made Eleanor, her father's oldest daughter, his heir presumptive to the Duchy of Aquitaine. A living brother would be the only thing that could displace her. So if her father remarried and had a boy, she wouldn't get Aquitaine. But other than that, she was next in line. When Eleanor was around 13, her family, meaning her father and her sister and her, moved from Poitiers to Bordeaux. Her father was pretty sick, and it wasn't looking like he was getting better. I don't think they know what was wrong with him. He just was like, yeah, I'm not doing well. So they were moving to Bordeaux, and when they got to Bordeaux, Duke William left his daughters because if you can't trust an archbishop, who can you trust? And he set out on pilgrimage, likely because he was sick. He's gonna go pray to God, please make me better.
Right.
But then Duke William X died on Good Friday, April 9th, 1137, while he was on pilgrimage, so he never came back. And we have a couple of stories. Tell me what you think.
Okay.
So he was dying. He knew he was dying. It was Good Friday. He was like, yeah, this is the end. He's going to write out a new will, which a little sus. Maybe take care of that before you leave. But
Right.
so on his
You're
deathbed,
going.
he's like, oh, by the way. But he supposedly wrote that his daughter was to get Aquitaine and that the King of France, King Louis, was to be his ward. And he was to find her a husband and protect Aquitaine and all that stuff. Then he supposedly, and I say supposedly because we don't actually know, but word on the street is that he sent men to the archbishop that had his daughters to inform him of the death and also to send them, as soon as they told the archbishop, they were to go to the King of France and tell him. And they were to tell no one on the way. There were no stops. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. But we also think that the will might have been forged.
Oh.
So it might not even be real. Although he did make it clear that he wanted his daughter to have Aquitaine. That part is clear. The whole part about the king being in charge, and that might not be real. So it's possible that when the men left Eleanor's dead father, they went to the archbishop, and either with his permission or not, someone was like, go to the king right away because Aquitaine's up for grabs. King has to be the first to know. It might not have come from her father.
Yeah, she was only 13 years old.
Yeah.
And she was a girl, so none of the men around her would have wanted her to be in charge.
Yeah, and whoever she married would then be in charge. So, pick your favorite and put them in charge of her. So I don't know. I feel like it was a forgery, personally, only because he was leaving on pilgrimage and he was super sick and he knew he might die. Like, I feel like he had his affairs in order. So anything made after that is sus to me. And I can't decide if the archbishop was in on it, but I kind of think he was.
He might have got a kickback.
Yep.
To the king.
Yep. I think when he died, his people went to the archbishop and the archbishop was like, look, tell the king now. Me and the king can work together. And maybe he had good intentions. I don't know that they were necessarily nefarious, but I don't think it came from William. So back to Duke William the 10th, because there's a lot of Duke Williams, 9, 10. So Eleanor of Aquitaine was now the 13-year-old Duchess of Aquitaine. But of course, she was still a child. So she was old enough to get married, but not old enough to be a duchess by herself. So...
Double standard.
Right? Like, she could have got married a year before when she was 12, which is crazy. Ugh. Crazy. And she was one of the most eligible, wealthy heiresses in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
She was the ticket. She was the one you wanted your single son to marry, because back then, as soon as she got married, all her possessions, well, mostly, we'll get back into that, but most of her possessions would transfer to her husband's name. So the King of France was Louis VI, or as he is known on the streets, Louis the Fat. So, I mean, it was Louis the Gross, but gross in French is fat, so I don't know that one is better than the other. He's a large man, and that's what he was most famous for, apparently. And he wanted Aquitaine bad, bad. He was like, that is a lot of land. I want it.
And it was rich land, too.
Yeah.
They had wine. They had salt. It was a big tourism place because people would go through it to get to the, is it Compostela?
Yeah, and it was warm because it was southern France. It was, like, just north of Spain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, the weather was nice. Which, to me, I'm like, oh, yeah, I'd want to live in Aquitaine, too. It's on the water. Well, I mean, I guess depending on where you are, because Aquitaine was huge. But it could be on the water if you wanted it to be. If you were the owner of Aquitaine, that's where my castle would go.
Yep.
So Louis the Fat wanted Aquitaine bad for all the aforementioned reasons. And he spent about 6 seconds deciding that the young Duchess should marry his son, the future Louis VII. And he had no chill at all. He immediately sent his son off with a large retinue, including 500 knights, to Bordeaux. So that wasn't subtle. He was like, dibs. No. Found out there's a 13-year-old who needs to be married, and I have a 17-year-old son. So he basically sent him off with an army.
At least they were kind of close in age.
Oh, right. At least he wasn't 55. I mean, no offense to the 55s. I'd totally be into a 55 now, but not when I was 13. So yeah, at least they're both teenagers. So 13-year-old Eleanor of Aquitaine, Duchess in her own right, was married to 17-year-old Prince Louis, Dauphin of France, the future king, just 3 months after her father's death. So that was fast. And she's likely, I would assume, sad. I don't know much about their relationship, but she's 13 and now she's an orphan. She lost her mom 7 years earlier, and now she doesn't have a dad. And she has to get married to someone who I'm assuming she barely knows. Mm-hmm. If she knows him at all, honestly, because she was living in the south of France her whole life. Mm-hmm. So part of the marriage agreement was that the Duchy of Aquitaine would stay independent from France. So that would not transfer into her husband's name, which is unusual for then. Married women couldn't own things. So for her to, he would be the Duke of Aquitaine, but she would be the main, it was hers, not his.
Like, he would be her consort.
Yes.
Or Aquitaine. Okay.
Yes. And they would unite, though, when they had a son. Because while Aquitaine let females inherit the Duchy of Aquitaine, France did not let females inherit the throne of France.
Spoiler alert, no sons.
Yeah. And so the groom was very religious. Very, 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 very religious. He had been raised to be an archbishop or a cardinal. Kind of a Henry VIII vibe.
Okay. So he had an older brother?
Had an older brother who I think fell off a horse and died. And So when it was roughly the same time that Henry VIII was like, oh shoot, now I'm going to be king too. Like preteen kind of years.
Right.
But until then, he had been raised to be very religious, and unlike Henry VIII, he was suited for it. He was like into it. He was like, yes, I'm going to be the best cardinal that ever existed, probably the Pope. He took it all very, very seriously. And
Well, I have a quote
yes.
attributed to Eleanor, who, after having married Louis, I thought to have married a king, but I find I have wed a monk.
Yes, because he was so religious. And that means more than it means now, I think. Because back then, there was all these rules about when you could and could not have sex. Like, you straight up couldn't have sex on Saturdays because you had to prepare for church the next day.
Oh.
And it was like 3 days a week you couldn't have sex. And then any holy days you couldn't have sex. Any high holidays, which there's a lot, especially in Orthodox Catholicism. And so there was, I mean, it worked out to be like maybe half the days of the year you would be allowed to have sex, and God was okay with that. And obviously people cheated all the time. Like, there are people who have birthdays who had to be conceived during the 12 days of Christmas because of that. And so you know their parents probably cheated and was like, yeah, it's Christmas, but we can have sex anyway. Even though, according to the church, you can't. But he was super religious.
I did read a blurb in a different book. I think it was Sex with Kings by Eleanor Herman, where his priest would just pull him out of bed with her.
Yes, yes. And there was a lot of kind of religious ceremonies where they would have this big religious ceremony to forgive the king of all these things, and then 9 months later they'd have a baby. Like it coincided with their children that they did have, that they'd have these huge, like, how awkward to have this giant church ceremony anytime you have to have sex with your husband.
Ew.
Yuck. Eleanor was from the South. She was worldly. She had a sharp wit. She liked clothes and nice shoes.
Who doesn't?
Right? Super relatable. And they spoke different dialects of French. So they spoke the same language, but it wasn't so easy for them to understand each other. Because she spoke a southern dialect, he spoke a northern dialect. And there was that monk thing. So they weren't so compatible, is what I'm saying.
Right.
The couple, after marrying, left immediately for Poitiers, where Eleanor had just moved from with her sick father. Like, she was just going home.
Okay.
And so that they could be crowned Duke and Duchess of Aquitaine. And they got word 1 week into the festivities, like, they've been Duke and Duchess for 1 week now. Word came that Louis the Fat had died of dysentery a week ago. So the day they got married, they also became king and queen.
Oh.
Louis the Fat was, again, probably into eating and such. He got dysentery from bad water, and it was during a heat wave, so he was probably drinking extra water, maybe? I mean, I don't know. But it was during a heat wave, so you're thirsty. You're going to drink a lot of water. Bad water, dysentery. He wasn't the healthiest man. He died. So now 13-year-old Eleanor was not only the Duchess of Aquitaine, she was also the Queen of France. And like I said, her dad just died 3 months before. This was going very quickly. She is supposed to be a 7th grader.
Can you imagine?
Now she's queen.
If you were 13?
I can't imagine.
In charge
I didn't even have my
duchy and then a whole country.
Right? I didn't even have my first boyfriend until I was 15. So no, I was just like, I hope a boy kisses me someday. Eleanor found it hard to fit in at French court. Her mother-in-law didn't like her. Relatable. If you know, you know. My mother-in-law is not a huge fan of me. Eleanor was a Southern lady. She was, I think, I always say this, but if you've seen Game of Thrones, it's like that. The Southern lady is like, you know, into the clothing and the fun and the
fashion and style.
Yeah, and the middle part where Paris is kind of north of that was very much more religious and solemn and serious. So she didn't fit in. And her mother-in-law probably saw her as kind of, I don't know, a floozy. I mean, not sexually necessarily, because she's a little girl, but kind of just like frivolous and shallow and not
well, I wonder,
serious.
like, on the same length, Like someone from the South, the American South, marrying someone from
Yeah, it
New
would be kind
England.
of like that. And her clothing was seen as scandalous, probably because it's hot in southern France. It's a little
Right?
colder in Paris, because that's north. And, so they were like, whoa, what are you wearing? Like, too much skin. Dial it back, lady. And let's be honest, she's probably cold, like going from southern France to
Mm-hmm.
Paris. And we don't know for sure because she didn't have a baby for quite a few years into her marriage. But they do suspect that she had a miscarriage at around the age of 14,
Oh,
meaning she would have gotten pregnant almost right away, which does make sense because according to the church, you're not married if you don't consummate the marriage.
right.
And her husband, being so religious, would have been like, well, we definitely have to do that because otherwise
It's
it's
my
not real.
duty.
Yeah. So she had a miscarriage because she was only 14. Like,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, that's a lot harder to have a baby when you're that young.
Mm-hmm.
And then they didn't for quite a while because likely, I mean, her husband didn't seem that into her. Not that he didn't like her. He liked her a lot. But like sexually, he wasn't like a sexual guy so much. Or at least he felt guilty religious wise. Maybe he was
Well,
super
that makes
sexual,
sense
but
if he grew up thinking that he was going to be celibate.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, he did like her a lot. They said that he almost like worshipped her. He was like a puppy dog and he loved her, but in like a little kid kind of a way.
Okay.
Like how like 3-year-olds just think you're the best auntie ever. That's how he loved her.
Okay.
And she had a sister who, after moving to Paris, went by the name Petronilla, which I kind of like. You don't hear a lot of
Hmm.
Petronillas,
Okay.
but I don't hate that name. What do you think about the name Petronilla? Are you like, oh, no?
It makes me think of citronella.
Oh, yeah,
So,
okay, I get
does she
that.
keep mosquitoes away?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not, it's not a common name. It's like a Jaquetta or an Ermengarde. Like, I just like the uniqueness. We get a lot of Annes and Margarets, you
And
know?
Mary's and yep.
Yes.
Yep.
And even quite a few Janes, but you don't see a Petronilla. But now I think of the camping candle to keep the mosquitoes away.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Maybe I'll name a cat Petronilla.
That would be cute.
And Petronilla went with her to court because both her parents were dead too, and all her siblings except for her sister Eleanor. So she was
Right.
alone and younger than her. So she was maybe like 11.
Okay.
So Petronilla went to court with her sister, and Petronilla loved court. She thought it was great, but she, like her sister, was a little more scandalous.
Hmm.
And she wanted to get with the king's cousin Raoul. But
Oh.
Raoul was way older than her.
Oh.
He was, I think, in his 40s.
Oh.
And he was married.
Oh.
So, not great. But,
Petronilla. You put on the brakes, baby.
right? Petronilla's like, ooh, look at this. But at this point, Petronilla's a little older. She's not still 11, but she's a teenager. And he
Mm-hmm.
is a married, middle-aged man. And back then, middle-age was like basically almost dead. So, I don't know. She's probably like, he's got a lot of money. I don't want to put gold digging on Petronilla, but I'm not sure what the appeal was with this man. So he was already married.
Maybe she had daddy issues.
Oh, for sure. For sure. She probably did, right? Like
Well,
she
and,
lost
and you
both
know,
her
her dad
parents
when she
and
was young, and so she wants a replacement for that.
yeah, and it would have felt like security, which she definitely wouldn't
Mhm.
have felt. She was just with her sister, the Queen of France.
Right. Yeah. Oh, my sister's the Queen of France. It's not enough.
Right? Like that cousin of the king, he's like a silver fox. I'll get with him. So, and he agreed. Raoul put his wife aside. He was like, "Bye. I'm
Oh.
I'm going with Petronilla. Sorry. Petronilla likes me and I like Petronilla." But she was a noble lady, and not just because
Mhm.
she married her husband, because she had 3 noble brothers
Okay.
who were like, "You can't just put our sister aside for a teenager.
Mhm.
That's the queen's sister. Like, who's Petronilla anyway? Like,
Yeah.
what are you doing, Raoul?" And they brought war because
Oh.
the king reached out to some of his bishops that were closer, and those bishops were like, "Yeah, that marriage is annulled. You can have that." Because the king asked, because the queen asked the king, because Petronilla asked her sister.
Ah.
So they were connected. And
It's not what you know, it's who you know.
always, I need to know more people. So they annulled this marriage, and her brothers were like, nope, this is war. Like, now we're pissed. You can't just throw our. She's your wife. You have children. Like, you're living your life, and you just went with this teenager.
Children.
They did. And Louis and Raoul were excommunicated.
Really?
Yes, because then there was this whole, like, then the Pope had to get involved. He had to be like, okay, whose side am I on? And he was like, yeah, that's not the best look. Just like throwing your wife away to get with this teenager.
Yeah.
So they got excommunicated. So then Louis was pissed. So Louis was like, I'm going to attack you back. Louis attacked Champagne because he was like, you can't just excommunicate me. You can't just like bring war on me to his cousin's brother. How annoyed would you be at your cousin? Like you
asked me for a favor and then you get me excommunicated from the church.
And this is a super religious guy. Like, that must have broke him.
Yeah.
The church was everything to him. And he got excommunicated.
Oof.
So he went to Champagne and attacked. And 1,300 men, women, and children barricaded themselves into a church while their houses burned down around them. They were like, well, we'll be safe, I guess. But Louis' army was shooting fire arrows like into their thatched roofs. Buildings were burning down. Now, this is a Christina's conspiracy theory. It's not mine because I didn't come up with it, but there's two schools of thought.
Okay.
One, they were shooting fire arrows everywhere, and somehow on accident, the church roof caught fire. Or they were shooting all the roofs, and someone was like, yeah, burn that church down too. But either way, the church with the 1,300 people in it caught on fire. And burned down. The people couldn't get out. Like, they were like, we're talking like nailed like boards on stuff, right? Because they were like, there's an army outside burning everything down. Like, we're not safe. So they couldn't get out. So 1,300 men, women, and children burned alive inside this church. And reports of the time say that there was screaming, there was awful smells. I mean, this was straight up horror right in front of your eyes. And the king was traumatized. He had like quite a large amount of PTSD from this.
I bet.
Because he's now the super religious guy who got kicked out of the church and then burnt 1,300 people alive in a church.
In a church?
Yeah.
Be remembered.
Thanks for listening.